Hey everyone, welcome back. So today we're taking a deep dive into something I know a lot of you have been asking about, tonal
The
languages.
tonal languages.
Yeah, and we've got a lot of questions from you guys wanting to know more about, how they work and what makes them so unique.
Yeah,
And, it's something that I think a lot of people find kind of mysterious and maybe even a little intimidating.
right.
So, like when we think about language, we usually think about words and grammar,
Right.
but in tonal languages, the pitch of your voice actually plays a huge role in the meaning of words.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's more than just like how high or low your voice is.
Right.
It's about how those changes in pitch can completely change what you're saying.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I guess before we get too far, let's just sort of start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is a tonal language?
Well, a tonal language is a language where the meaning of a word can change depending on the tone or pitch in which it's spoken. So in English, we use intonation to express emotion or to ask a question, like when we raise our voice at the end of a sentence to indicate a question.
Right, right.
But in tonal languages, tone is not just an expressive tool, it's an integral part of the language itself.
Got
It's
it.
woven into the very fabric of the words.
Okay, so it's like each syllable has its own kind of built-in melody.
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
Okay, so it's not just about sounding expressive, right? It's actually changing the meaning of the word itself.
Exactly, yeah. It's like a code embedded in the sound.
So could you give us an example maybe of how this works in a real language?
Absolutely. So let's take Mandarin Chinese as an example.
Hmm.
Mandarin has four main tones and a neutral tone.
Okay.
And so the syllable ma, depending on the tone, can mean mother, hemp, horse, or scold.
Wow.
And so you can see how just changing the pitch of your voice can completely change the meaning of that one syllable.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's like a whole extra layer of meaning woven into the language. It's almost like you have to sing the words correctly.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I imagine for someone who's not used to hearing or speaking a tonal language, it can be really difficult to pick up on those subtle differences in pitch.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real challenge for learners.
Yeah.
Do you happen to have an audio clip to illustrate how different those tones actually sound?
I do. So here's an example of ma in each of the four tones.
Okay, let's hear it.
ma, 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 ma.
Wow.
So you can hear how drastically the pitch changes.
Yeah, it's amazing how much variation there is just in that one syllable. Okay, so we've talked about Mandarin. I know Thai is another tonal language.
Yes.
How does its tonal system compare to Mandarin's?
So Thai is also a tonal language, but it has 5 tones.
And like Mandarin, each syllable carries a specific tone that determines its meaning. But what's really interesting is that while both languages use tone, the specific tones and how they're distributed in words can be quite different.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just like one universal tonal system, it's variations across different languages.
Exactly, yeah. And it's that kind of variation that makes studying tonal languages so interesting.
So for linguists trying to understand this, how do they actually analyze these tones? I mean, there are tools or methods they use to kind of break it down.
Yeah, there are specific tools and methods. So phoneticians, who are linguists that study the sounds of speech, they use tools like spectrograms, which are visual representations of sound waves.
Okay.
And this allows them to see the different frequencies and patterns of tones. And they also use a system of notation to transcribe tones so they can write them down and analyze them.
That sounds really technical. Okay, so we've talked about how tonal languages work. I'm curious, how did they even come about? Do we know anything about their history or how they developed?
Well, the origins of tonal languages is still a bit of a mystery, and linguists have different theories about how they evolved. One theory is that they developed from systems of stress, where certain syllables in a word are emphasized more than others.
Okay.
And over time, these stress patterns might have become more exaggerated and eventually evolved into distinct tones. Another theory is that tonal languages arose from the loss of consonants. So as consonants disappeared, tone might have taken over the role of differentiating words.
Interesting. So there are different theories about how it happened.
Exactly, yeah. There's no one definitive answer.
Fascinating. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what it's like to learn a tonal language. I mean, I imagine it must be pretty challenging, especially for someone whose native language is not tonal.
It is definitely challenging. I mean, imagine trying to learn a language where just a slight change in pitch can completely change the meaning of what you're saying.
Right.
It's like learning to sing a song where every note has to be perfectly in tune. And so For learners, one of the biggest hurdles is training your ear to hear the subtle differences between
I
tones.
bet. Are there any strategies that people can use to kind of overcome that hurdle?
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the most important things is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible.
Okay.
So, listen to native speakers, watch movies, listen to music,
Right.
and try to imitate the tones you hear. And another helpful strategy is to focus on pronunciation from the very beginning. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. I mean, everybody makes mistakes when they're learning a new language.
Sure.
And the more you practice, the better you'll get at hearing and producing the tones.
So it sounds like a lot of it comes down to just really training your ear.
Absolutely. And your vocal cords, too, right?
Right.
It's a physical thing as well. So, getting used to producing those sounds accurately.
Okay, so now I want to shift gears a bit to something that I find really fascinating about tonal languages,
Yeah.
and that's the cognitive implications. Does speaking a tonal language affect how your brain processes information? Like, are there differences in the brains of tonal language speakers compared to non-tonal language speakers?
Yeah, that's a really interesting area of research. And there is some evidence to suggest that speaking a tonal language can actually shape how your brain works. So, for example, studies have shown that tonal language speakers tend to have better pitch perception than non-tonal language speakers.
Hmm,
And some studies have even found that tonal language speakers might be better at certain musical tasks. And there's also some evidence that tonal languages might engage different brain regions compared to non-tonal languages, suggesting that tone might be processed its unique way.
wow, so speaking a tonal language could actually make you more musically inclined.
It's possible.
That's incredible. Okay,
Oh,
so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about what tonal languages are, how they work, the challenges of learning them, and even some of the potential effects on the brain. So what's a final thought you would want to leave our listener with about this amazing linguistic phenomenon?
well, I think it's important to remember that tonal languages represent a significant portion of the world's languages,
Right.
spoken by billions of people, and they really challenge our assumptions about how language works.
Right.
And they offer this unique window into the diversity of human communication. So if you're at all interested in exploring how sound and meaning intertwine in fascinating ways, tonal languages are a great place to start.
Absolutely. And, for our listener out there, if you're particularly intrigued by this idea that speaking a tonal language could actually affect how your brain works, maybe look into the research on how tone affects musical ability. That's a really fascinating area of study.
Yeah, definitely.
So happy exploring, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.